Welcome to Strange Coordinates, the show where we use brands as roadmaps to arrive at surprising places. I'm Robert Baylog.
And I'm Topher Burns. Robert and I founded an advertising agency called Territorial. We help brands find their place in the world by exploring how history, culture, desire bounce off one another to reveal fascinating insights about what's cool about being human.
And that's basically the premise of the podcast. So every episode, one of us gives the other a brand to explore. And that person has to kind of trek off into the wilderness and come back with a story that they find to be the most interesting or engaging or compelling. Could be something fun, could be scary, could be about murder, could be about lions flying in planes. Those have all been things that have happened on this podcast. And they've shown
Sometimes
that we can...
in the same episode.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really about using brands as compass points to discover more about the world around us.
And, we've been doing some discovering, this is a new podcast. We're still, figuring stuff out and trying new things. But I think it's also an important moment for us to take a pause. We have been discovering more about the world around us using brands as compass points for now 10 episodes. This is our 10th episode.
Episodes. Yeah. It's kind of amazing. It feels like more, honestly.
I agree with you. And, technically we have our Stranger Coordinates podcast where we interview really interesting people and we give them a little quiz. And we turn them into omnipotent brand managers for a little bit.
Yeah.
But, those aside, I agree. It's a testament to the journeys that we've gone on together, the breadth of understanding that we've shared with each other in the world.
I think we've just covered a lot of ground too. Like we've been peripatetic here. We've gone everywhere. We have explored crevices and secret back rooms that I never thought we would.
Yeah.
So it feels like we're really just being encyclopedic, and now we're just really tooting our own horns right now, aren't we?
Well, I don't know. We're just saying we had a great time, and I hope everybody listening has been enjoying as well.
Speaking of time, Topher,
oh,
this is an early one for you. This is an early record for you. How do you feel about this early morning record?
My alarm went off at 6:30, and I said I'm going to be in front of a mic in an hour, and I looked at my cat, and she looked at me, and she put her head back down, and I was like, "Yeah, I feel you, girl." But here we are. Yeah. I had a little bit of decaf coffee and some Choco Puff cereal. So I'm ready to roll.
Generic Cocoa Puffs, basically?
There's like a really interesting, I've got this like, how they're like making everything that used to be made with starch. They're like making it with protein now.
Yeah.
Like Jake literally came home one day recently from Costco with a bag of like chicken chips, which I cannot endorse.
No.
I think they are more adjacent to dog treats than they are to things that humans should consume. But the cereal that I had this morning is sunflower seed based chocolate cereal. Mm-hmm. It is really good.
Yeah.
I highly recommend that.
That sounds delicious.
Don't eat dog treats. Do eat like sort of like toasted nut.
Noted.
Cocoa flavored things.
I love that. Maybe this could become a new segment.
Yeah, just like recommend.
Yeah. What Topher has for breakfast.
Which is it is far ranging. Yesterday I had the roasted sablefish on some rice with some like Thai flavored peanuts.
It's part of almost every day of our agency. We kind of explore Topher's dietary journey.
There's someone in a different dimension that is using my breakfast as like a fortune telling device. Like, so, they're like seeing into what I do, and like the way that some people look at entrails, some people look at the flight of birds, and somewhere someone is looking at my breakfast and saying like, you really should divorce your husband.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing that we're talking about food and thereby the kitchen because of today's episode.
Oh yeah, and may I say, we're taking a moment to look back at our grand 10 episodes of doing things, and the thing that we're like, oh, you had to get up a little bit early. Yeah, I had to get a little early, but I'm in the co-pilot seat today.
Yeah,
and so in this journey to the kitchen, I get to kick back and just kind of let you do all the journeying.
There's going to be some participation, as we've kind of refined that here on Strange Coordinates, where
I'm here to be collaborative and supportive, but I also am excited for you to take the helm. And so as we go into the kitchen, you will of course be leading us through the brand of Cuisinart.
that's very true. And ironically, we're not going to start in the kitchen today.
Oh,
Yeah, twist.
excellent.
Right out the gate. All right.
I'm already more awake than I was before.
Okay, so we're going to start here where we're sitting, both sitting,
Yes.
because you have an Apple laptop, right? You have a MacBook. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there are actually ways in which your MacBook is connected to Cuisinart.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So you could kind of say we're podcasting from a distant cousin of a food processor right now, which is pretty exciting. So the story goes like this. It's the early 80s, and Steve Jobs is working on the computer that's going to be the personal computer that invents a category and changes the world, the Macintosh. So we don't need to go too much into this. Everybody knows it, but Steve was not an easy person to satisfy. I think what's kind of like been well established. And as you can imagine, the process of kind of landing the exterior design of the computer was pretty brutal. It wasn't just sort of like, you nailed it, guys, great job. You know, that was not what was happening. So he was basically killing version after version after version of the form factor for the computer. I think after the Apple II, he wanted something that felt like friendly, and he was looking for a certain thing, but he was like, it's too boxy, it's got the wrong bevel. There was a lot of no's, a lot of like, I don't like this, but not a lot of what am I actually looking for. He was a prolific borrower, as we know. Like, he got the idea for the Mac operating system from Xerox and the way in which it was a super user-friendly interface. And so apparently he goes off to the mall. This is the story. He goes off to Macy's, apparently. Maybe he's looking for a turtleneck or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. So he's wandering around the kitchen department and perusing the appliances, and then he kind of spots it. And it's the Cuisinart food processor. So this is the like early 80s, 83, 84. So early generation.
So the one we all kind of picture when we picture a Cuisinart.
Yeah. And it's kind of one of those eureka moments. Like, it's got that neutral molded plastic, right? Like, it's got beautiful curves, really nicely beveled. It's got
and only 2 buttons.
Super generous buttons, really simple. And there's sort of like utter approachability in the service of utility. So he's like stops dead in his tracks, and he sees this thing, and he rushes back to his designers. He says, you need to go buy a food processor, and that is what we need to be basing this on. So,
the success of Steve Jobs is such that I was like, why didn't you just send them a picture of it?
Right.
But,
right, exactly. Like, why didn't you take out his phone?
It wouldn't happen for another 20 years. Mm-hmm. But sorry, dude.
No, not at all. I think it's just, first of all, I have a very difficult time imagining Steve Jobs in Macy's. I don't know why.
It's very discordant.
Just a huge disconnect there.
Yeah. I can't imagine his constitution even allowed him to pass the threshold.
Yeah. And I can hear him wandering through the aisles, and Taylor Dane is playing softly in the background or something. It's just doesn't make a ton of sense. Yeah, exactly. Aren't you a big Taylor Dane stan?
No, but aren't we all?
That's true. Yeah. All right. So the question is, how did the Cuisinart make its way to that Palo Alto Macy's kitchen display? How did it become so influential? So Topher, this is interesting because the origin story of Cuisinart is basically a mirror image of another brand that you've assigned me in the past, which is Nordic Track.
Whoa!
And do you remember when we were talking for RA, you kind of low-key accused me of serving you up heteronormative brands, hyper-masculine engineering brands? I feel like you're giving me retro gadget brands without knowing it.
Yeah, that very well could be.
Which I'm here for. I'm totally here for. Well, let's just kind of look at the kind of similarities, because it's pretty amazing. So you start with the sort of the inventor with a personal passion.
I was wondering if there was a personal origin
Obviously,
story.
Yeah. So in this case, it's a person named Carl Sondheimer, who was an electrical engineer and a food enthusiast, a French food enthusiast. And basically, Carl's claim to fame in this realm is that he brought the food processor, which was at the time a French commercial device that was used in kitchens in France, to the U.S. market in 1971. So he saw this thing when he was living in France. He said, "This would be amazing. I think I can engineer that down to a form factor that can be suitable for American kitchens." And another interesting thing about Carl is that another one of his inventions from a previous company that he had founded was used in the Apollo moon program. It was like a navigation component.
Wow.
So like in terms of coverage, in terms of influence and coverage,
Yeah.
Carl's like basically got the moon and like a good percentage of Earth, which is
Amazing.
pretty amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got Carl. He founded the company. He was kind of a brilliant guy, a little bit more marketing savvy than our friend at Nordic Track originally.
Yeah. You can tell that the name is like, yeah, that came from a French mind.
Yeah. There's no Nordic jock in the wings here. Like he was like Cuisinart. It makes ton.
Cuisinart.
Yeah. So there's also kind of like similar rise and fall that's tied to a single breakthrough product. So for Cuisinart, it was the food processor, which was, Cuisinart was basically synonymous with food processor for the first few decades of its existence, which is a thing we'll talk about a little bit later. And during the 70s and 80s, the food processor completely transformed home cooking. And there was a really interesting quote I came across from Jacques Pepin, who was talking about how he would have to make like a mousse before, and it was like you take a thing through a screen, and then it was like you take a meat through a screen, and then you would redo it again, and you dice it and chop it. It was like 17 steps.
Yeah.
And it would take half a day or whatever to do. And the food processor was like, you can make these incredibly refined French and European technique meals in an instant. So it transformed home cooking, and because of Cuisinart and others that followed up, because of course everybody's like, that's a great idea, I'm going to make one, like Oster, Sunbeam, all those folks. Pretty soon, almost 50% of households in America had a food processor. So super fast household penetration, which is awesome, but at the same time it means the market tightens. Everybody who has one, who wants one, has one.
Yeah.
And so he, by late 80s, he kind of sensed the writing on the wall. He sold the company to another consortium. They mismanaged it for 2 years, and it declared bankruptcy. Sounds almost exactly like like Nordic Track. And so, like Nordic Track, Cuisinart was actually also resurrected as a brand by another big parent company, and now flourishes with a much more diverse product line. Cuisinart is owned by Conair. And obviously, as a side note, as soon as that came up, I started looking at the movie Con Air, because
I always, like anytime I see Con Air, I encounter most in hotels. Like it seems to be the brand of choice of like the hotel hairdryer. And I'm always like, Nicolas Cage with an inadvisable haircut.
Yeah. It's a shame that we're not a film-based podcast, because I went down a bit of a rabbit hole there. And there's so much wild shit that happened in connection to that movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just crazy stuff. Like they were all sequestered in the desert, like a remote part of the desert, for like 8 weeks, and it was just a bunch of just like the testosterone built into a bit of a Scirocco of manliness, and like everybody had their shirts off. They were doing like prison workouts all the time. Like Danny Trejo was there, just like amping people up. There were fist fights.
Wow.
Just nuts. Yeah, it's crazy. You should look into it. It's really, really ridiculous. Unfortunately,
that sounds like, I like started and I'm like, that sounds fun. And then by the time I was like, that sounds terrifying. I don't want to be there at all.
Yeah. And they actually, the scene where the plane hits the casino, they actually ran a plane in the casino because the Stardust was being demolished at the time. So they were like, hey, can we just drive a plane through your casino? And so like wild stuff.
Do you think that it actually happened the other way, where somebody was like, did you hear that they're like demolishing the Stardust? And somebody was like, wait, let's run a plane into
I think
it.
partially, yeah. Because what I read was that like it was just this sort of like process of one-upsmanship between the writers and the director. And so it'd be like, well, what if we did this? And what if we did this? And like kept on trying to amp it up, such that Jerry Bruckheimer, who was the producer, eventually thought that they were basically making a spoof of a Bruckheimer film because it was getting so ridiculous.
He was like, are you fucking with me?
Yeah, it's pretty insane. And you mentioned, of course, Nick Cage's hair, which is legendary. There's a whole story there that like he was briefed that his character was sort of based on like a Greg Almond kind of guy. And so he showed up on set for the first day with like long flowing hair and a huge beard. And Bruckheimer was like, I'm paying $20 million for this face. You're not going to hide it behind hair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Made him shave his beard, but Nick would not cut his hair. And that's why like the whole beauty shot of his hair waving in the wind is just so hilarious because he was really attached to his hair.
I respect that choice.
Yeah, totally. Me too. I mean, it's a classic. It's a cult classic. Unfortunately, totally unrelated and irrelevant to our discussion today.
Okay.
But it came up, and I knew it would come up for you as soon as I said Con Air.
Definitely.
So that's the basic history of Cuisinart. We don't need to go too much into it. Basically, breakthrough product, huge sales, a little bit of a dip, reinvented as a product line, leaning on the brand name. But I think what made it so influential for Steve Jobs, and actually for many others, was really the work of another person, an industrial designer named Mark Harrison. So Harrison was a pioneer of what's called universal design. So universal design is the design of buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to people regardless of age or disability or any other factors. So
like OXO kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of strange to think of it now that we needed to call that something different. But the prevailing philosophy in design for many decades, especially industrial design in the last century, was that you design for the average. Like you design for the average size, the average height, the average age, ability, all those things. And so,
which meant men also, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And so Harrison actually himself had suffered a brain injury as a child and had to relearn basic functions like walking and talking. And so he brought that to his design career. And so when he was asked to redesign the food processor by Cuisinart in like the mid 70s, it was like the second generation of food processor, he brought these precepts of universal design to bear. And you called out some of them earlier, right? His design created the iconic features that we still associate with the core Cuisinart food processor. These sort of oversized, like easy to press paddle-shaped buttons. There's only two. There's basically on and off. The large handle, like think about all food processors now. They are almost unique in appliances in that they have this really oversized, big, easy to grasp handle. And then bold and readable typefaces. If I think about those Cuisinart buttons, it's like huge on, huge off, and it's very, very simple. And that just made sure that cooks of all stripes could use this amazing device. And so like it had a real impact on its popularity because people who didn't feel intimidated by the machine could actually engage with it. And so in universal design, which kind of came to commercial product design or residential product design through the Cuisinart, it's actually kind of infiltrated, tech culture, app culture, device culture, and things like that. And it started in many ways with the Cuisinart.
I mean, it definitely, you see, I was thinking about it the moment you said it, just the, Steve Jobs encountering it. I'm like, well, now I want an iPod with just one button totally makes sense.
Right.
If that's like the direction he's going, he's just like, I just want an on-off, I just want to be able to interface with just like the tiniest amount of input.
Yeah, and hide the other stuff inside. Apparently the first version of the Apple One, was like a clear case where you could see all the inner workings and like the circuit board was kind of exposed and all this stuff. And I think he's just had a major allergy to that. So Jobs wasn't the only notable fan of Cuisinart, and I think like the story of Cuisinart really is the story of influence in many ways. Like it influenced design through Apple, it influenced design through other channels as well. It influenced chefs. Early on, America's most famous chef, Julia Child, was a huge booster of Cuisinart. She
makes sense that her if she cut her teeth, so to speak, on like the crazy complicated French dishes,
So we all know Julia, we all know JC, Jukies as she was called as a kid. Topher, do you have any idea what her first recipe was?
No.
This is kind of a trick question.
Then chocolate mousse.
No, shark repellent. So Shark repellent, yeah.
I knew she was an adventurous gal, but I didn't know
I
that.
know. Well, so did you know that she was actually in the precursor to the CIA?
I did know
Okay,
that.
yeah. So
I
before
did know she was a spy.
she was a spy, she was a spy in training. Maybe she wasn't actually doing spy work, but she was in the organization that was responsible for intelligence. So,
Hmm.
and this is before she had any interest in food. She actually came to cooking much later in her life, like in
Yeah.
her late 30s.
Hmm.
But during World War II, she was in the OSS. And she was part of a group that was looking at naval rescue. How do we retrieve sensitive, downed assets in the Navy? And
Yeah.
so apparently, a lot of people, there was a bit of like a shark paranoia. Like there was maybe like some like 20 shark attacks against downed pilots or people who had gone in the water,
Yeah.
and the OSS wanted to find a way to assure them that they would be kind of safe. And so there's all these materials about like, what to do when a shark approaches you, which is just
Yeah.
wild. And they're all like animated and like, like are illustrated in these very, New Yorker cartoon styles. It's just
Oh
very bizarre.
gosh.
But they wanted to reassure the Navy that were working on a solution, and so they were developing a shark repellent that pilots could put on themselves if they went into the water after having being shot down. And so the story goes is that she was sort of like actually concocting these, like mixing different things together to try to figure out what was going to work. And they came up with one which is basically like a metal, a particular metal that repels sharks that you would put on with a paste and things like that. But that was really her foray into combining ingredients, and obviously she
Huh.
went on to do a whole lot more.
Well, she didn't just know how to repel sharks, she was also extremely toxic to homosexuals.
Yeah. Yeah, there was an allusion to that in like her wiki, and then like a really quick like, but she learned when her friend died of AIDS, and it's like,
Yeah, yeah. It was she has a lot of bad quotes on the record, but she came around.
yeah, was she
We,
just
you know, we
like,
just had to lose an entire generation of
and
us
that's
to
yeah, exactly,
get her sympathy.
yeah. Well, she was her and Jacques Pepin and others. James Beard actually was a early user of the Cuisinart. So Cuisinart really got into chef culture really quickly. And at that time, I think there was also this chefs influencing home cooking in ways that then
Yeah,
I think we're seeing again now. But like there was the first wave of that wave of like you can do amazing things at home
right.
with the right recipes.
Yeah, it totally fits with Julia Child's brand, which is just kind of she she did the very traditional. She learned like the really laborious, exacting, hand done French ways to cook everything, but she also kind of sort of broke it down in a way for the home chef that was like, you can do this,
Yeah.
like it. So it totally makes sense that Cuisinart would be a welcome addition to that entire proposition.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit earlier about how like Cuisinart became synonymous with food processor. I think during the 70s and 80s, it wasn't like I need a food processor. It's like I need a Cuisinart, or I'm going to use the Cuisinart.
Yeah, like the Band-Aid and the Kleenex.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you mentioned. I was just gonna say like there's a bunch of brands like that, right? Kleenex, Jacuzzi. That's one of my favorite ones. Jacuzzi is a
I didn't actually even know that was a brand.
yeah, Jacuzzi is a brand name that became synonymous with hot tub.
Uh, I always pronounce it Yakutsi in my mind, and I don't even know if that's like totally
No.
responsible Italian. If you were gonna say it in Italian, how would you say jacuzzi?
It wasn't originally Jacuzzi. It was originally IACUZZI.
Oh, Yakutsi.
Yeah. And
Yeah, but Americans would never. Like, I could never.
it's
IA.
yeah, that
You know
made
what I
no
mean?
sense. Yeah, so Jacuzzi, brand name.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, I don't know, there's others. Q-tip. Did you know that Zipper was a brand name?
I did not know that.
Yeah. Zipper was a brand name. Scotch tape. I always forget that Scotch tape is a brand name.
Oh yeah, but just like Kleenex and Band-Aid, it's preventatively difficult to provide the actual name of the product. Like,
Yeah.
what are you gonna, adhesive bandage?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
you would never ask somebody for that.
Yeah.
And like facial tissue,
Right. Or like
Nope.
Q-tip, cotton swab.
cotton swab. No one likes to say swab.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting though because like you bring up a point that it's not a simple equation whether or not becoming like synonymous with the category is a good thing or a bad thing. It's not a always yes or always no, is it?
Yeah, and it like in some ways is kind of dependent on like how easy the noun or verb is to
Right.
like say
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, because like Zipper, I don't think it worked out great for the Zipper company.
Really?
Well, like, do you think of
Right.
do you think of we didn't know it was a brand, and then like
I mean, I'm a YKK man myself.
obviously,
but-
yeah, definitely. I think everyone's a YKK, and that's fun.
I don't think they have much of a choice, actually.
Yeah. Well, they just piggybacked. Like Zipper created the category, and then they become the brand that defines it, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And like for Kleenex, I don't know. It's kind of a wash for Kleenex, right? Like they're still probably the category leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like Q-Tip really, really dominates, really owns it. I don't even want to look
100%.
at.
When he gets on the mic with Janet Jackson, there's no beating it. I always thought that was, I'm like, of all the names, what is his name? Quentin? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But like Q-Tip, oh, come on, man. I don't find it a very
Maybe it's 'cause
appealing-
he's-
doesn't feel very dynamic to me.
I don't know. Maybe it's because he had like a soft delivery or something. He gets in your ears
Yeah,
with a
yeah,
soft
yeah. He's
delivery.
real gentle.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe. Well, like Cuisinart kind of struggled, right? Because they became synonymous with the product. The thing they didn't do in their first run was actually then take that name recognition and then diversify off of it, right? They didn't. The founder was like, no, well, this is what we make, and like if we're going to, and it's such high standards for quality, is like if we're going to put something out there, it's got to be as good as this. This
Yeah.
thing we made is perfect and ideal, and he just really never like springboarded off the Cuisinart name. And so when it folded and it was repurchased by Conair, Nicolas Cage, it was the first thing they did was like, well, we got to use the name and then kind of like build off of the back of it,
Yeah.
which is super smart.
It's interesting because it kind of goes to that, like, to me, the idea of we're going to do one thing and we're going to do it really well feels very European.
Right.
It also feels very engineering minded in general. So it sounds like this guy was kind of in that world. But it does seem like the type of thing that, like, in a European mindset is kind of like very focused on a classic European mindset, I should say. It strikes me as being very focused on kind of like nailing the fundamentals, establishing trust for yourself, thinking about the business as a long-term sort of like play. Whereas in America, it's kind of grow or die.
Yeah.
Like if you don't start eating other categories, your business will be cannibalized.
Right.
And so it like in some ways makes me feel a little like sad that that's how America, like that this guy couldn't, that Cuisinart couldn't just be the best
Right.
company to make food processors.
Right.
But,
But it's really interesting because, like, you think about Europe as a place where legacy is so important that people's family names became associated with the thing that they did for generations. Like, we're the Smiths because we just blacksmith for generation on generation on generation.
yeah.
Which is not a thing, which is really that sort of lack of mobility, I think, is kind of anathema to American culture,
Totally.
which I never thought of before. Thanks, Topher. Just expanding my mind.
Yeah.
Well, so Cuisinart, the name, has become obviously a massive brand equity. I think, as soon as you said Cuisinart, I was like, oh, amazing. And we were talking to a colleague yesterday and said that we were going to be doing Cuisinart on this episode. And she was like, that's awesome. I'm so excited to hear about that. So
Yeah.
like definitely carries a lot with it. And it's infiltrated culture in some fun ways too. So I love this because I love him. So Weird Al Yankovic. Do you say Yankovic or Yankovic? I always say Yankovic because I feel like it's a
I give
weird
it the
Slavic thing. But
Yeah, I give it the Vitch.
yeah. Well, Weird Al
Yakutsi. It's pronounced Yakutsi.
Weird Al Yakutsi. He's described his brain as a pop culture Cuisinart, which
Oh, I totally see that.
makes total sense. Yeah.
Yes.
And I was reading an article about him, and he's like, it's funny because he's managed to stay relevant longer than many of the bands that he's actually lampooned.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's
Well,
still,
they had the whole gag on 30 Rock of like Weird Aling being like a verb.
yeah.
And then like, so he Weird Al'd Jenna's single and she hated it. So she tried to normal Al him.
Yeah.
Or she like she made a thing that was like so
Oh, I
off-putting that
remember.
like he
Yeah,
couldn't make it weirder. It is about like broccoli farts, I think.
yeah.
And then he turned it. He was like the chorus was "fart so loud," and he turned it. He normaled it and turned it into "heart so proud" about like his dad going off to war.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing sense of humor, that guy.
Yeah,
It just and it just manages to still be relevant. So his whole thing was like he's always like absorbing pop culture and mixing it up in his brain. And
yeah.
so like, Cuisinart just becomes the perfect metaphor for that. And
Hmm.
another really fun one of the brand kind of punching through culture is in one of the kind of my favorite sequences in one of my favorite comedies, and it's Spaceballs. And I think it's worth kind of watching this because it's so ridiculously funny.
I do not remember a Cuisinart moment in Spaceballs.
It's part of like a very long series of things in which there's like a great joke after a great joke after a great joke.
Okay, so it's just kind of
But
like
it's like
hit two of three.
yeah, but it's like the
Yeah,
one, it's like a classic Mel Brooks moment. The Cuisinart line gets overshadowed by ludicrous speed because,
right.
but like the idea that the Cuisinart was both like a powerful thing, but just not up to like hyperjets. I just think it's so funny. And then later
Yeah.
on in this same sequence, when like they crash and his helmet gets like super squished and he's like dazed, Rick Moranis is dazed, and he's like, "How you doing? Smoke him if you got him." And it's like so funny. Well, Topher, it's been a journey at ludicrous speed through the universe of influence that Cuisinart has cooked up over the years. I hope
Yeah.
that you've had a good time on this whirlwind.
I absolutely have. I appreciate the whirlwind reference as well. One of the things that you were talking about in terms of like how Cuisinart moved from an apparatus, it solved a problem, and then moved into culture. It really makes me think of how that happens now. You can just think of the world of food in a world where like I definitely get barraged with kitchen
Yeah.
appliances and hacks and stuff like that on Instagram all the time. It makes me think of kind of like how companies are trying to kind of like find that conduit into culture
Yeah.
as well. But like Cuisinart did it the old-fashioned way by like actually just like having a better widget by like just really we found a totally new thing
Yeah.
that like people don't have access to.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring that up because I think that like, and listen, there's obviously new things being invented, sous vide devices and things like that.
Yeah, and I even thought like Ron Popeil,
Yeah.
a food dehydrator,
Yeah. Like I'm not to say that there's no like hardware progression that's happening, but I do feel that like a lot of the energy in cooking appliances and supplies and utensils is like the typical like startup disruptive approach. Like how do we change the supply chain so I can give you restaurant quality pans, at a better price. So like, Caraway and was it made for?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's where I think a lot of the wow is now. Not in like, hey, here's a device that actually fundamentally changes the way in which you can prepare foods. Like I don't see that as much. And even like the Ron Popeil stuff was really just kind of playing at the peripheries. But there are these major moments, I think, in kind of machine development that really moved cooking along, really moved culinary tastes along.
It seems like it also kind of happened at a time when culturally there was a lot more interest in kind of like chef quality, everything. You know what I mean? Like people were, there were home cooking shows. There was cooking moved from kind of like a chore you did to just kind of like keep your special guys going to work and going to school, and moved into a thing that was like really kind of about you know, exploring new techniques, being able to take pride in that. And so it makes sense that like the access to French kitchen technology would kind of be something that could fit into that movement.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder like what's, you know, what's going to have to almost like what's going to have to change in our desire to have food in order for us to have another sort of like category creating
Right.
doodad.
Well, there's like this, especially in culinary development, there's been this back and forth between like professional and amateur, and like, and it's always sort of been that way. Like
Yeah.
I was reading something about how the notion of set proportions and ingredient portions is relatively new. Like measuring spoons and measuring cups were an actual like radical invention. And the idea that, and I think as recently as like 1900 is when it was sort of started to become more standardized. But that's because like a chef working in a more professional environment would just kind of have that knowledge and they could replicate it and replicate it and replicate it. But if you're trying to share that knowledge with 100,000 people through a recipe, very difficult to say like, I don't know, grab this much.
A pinch.
Yeah. So then there's that play. And then like what we're seeing through Cuisinart was like, there's a moment where those techniques then that had been advanced in professional kitchens there was a translation into the home environment. So how do you give people the ability to do the same things that these massive commercial kitchens can do? And then that opened up a whole realm of food. So like, what's the next? Are we going to have like at-home molecular gastronomy? Like I'm going to be making foams. I mean, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, you do sort of. But then also just I was even thinking like, what does like the climate future bode for our food systems? You know, is it going to be about saving the water that you're using, or like, you know, like are there just kind of like, oh, we're going to need to sell food in more efficient ways, and so like reconstituting things is going to matter, or you know, but I don't know, just one direction that food could go.
Totally. All right, well, there it is, man.
Well, speaking of looking into the future,
oh, nice segue.
I'm curious about my own future and the future of the ears of our listeners by knowing what we're going to be looking into next episode.
It's interesting that you used the word ears. It's interesting that you're bringing us to a place located kind of in the upper part of our anatomy, because the brand that I would love you to look into has, had its theater of operations as primarily the face of a human. And it's a thing that I've always kind of just heard the name and been like, oh yeah, that's that. And then when I break down the name, I'm like, what does that actually mean? What is that from? So the brand that I want you to look into next time is Oil of Olay.
Oh.
Huh. Is Olay a place?
Is it a person?
Is it a person?
Is it an ingredient?
Is it oil of oil? Is that what that basically says? Is it like, because the root would kind of suggest that it is, but.
And now that I hear it too, I'm like, Olay.
Yeah. Right?
Okay. I have no clue.
Yeah. We haven't done a beauty brand, and I thought
we haven't done any.
Yeah, I thought it would be fun to dive into it.
Super fun. Yes.
Oil of Olay was my mother's go-to brand when I was growing up.
Yeah, I just know the word.
Yeah.
Like I just know that, like I have not really much of a personal connection even to using the product.
No. There was like I think I tried Regenerist once because I was like, hey buddy, you gotta slow the ravages of time, and I was like, let me just beep beep beep. And it worked amazingly.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I've been meaning to say
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's one of those words, it's one of those like brand names too where I have never separated out the pieces of it until I started to think about it. And I'm like, oh, so you're just leading with oil. That's like you're just like going with oil, and then there's this Olay hanging out there. So yeah, I'm really
Right.
curious to see where you take this.
I mean, there's definitely oils are back,
Yeah.
in terms of like being used on the face and in body. Because there was a while where they were like verboten, or like the last thing you wanted was oil.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, I'm gonna dig into it. I can't wait to see what we see.
Love it.
Okay, well that's gonna be us next. Um, but I think we were talking at the top of the show about 10 episodes. Before we sign out,
Yeah.
I would just like to say a big thank you to everybody who's been listening along with us.
Yeah.
It it does, we do this and we have a wonderful time. It is really meaningful when somebody's like, "Hey, I listened to blah blah blah,"
Yeah, totally.
and it happens rarely enough for us because, like,
Yeah.
we're just out here doing our thing. That it like really is meaningful. What I would like to offer to people, if you're listening right now and saying like, "Oh yeah, this has been a kick," like, I'd love to hear more. Find one person who you think would enjoy listening to this Cuisinart episode and send it to them. Is it a home chef? Is it somebody who is a little bit of a gadget fiend? Are they a Julia Childs fan? Find one person, send them this episode. We would love your help in sharing the joy of Strange Coordinates.
Indeed.
The more people that can go on this journey with us, the better. And thank you, everybody, for listening along with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, as we've been alluding to, you have been listening to Strange Coordinates. This is the show where we use brands as roadmaps to arrive at surprising places. Your hosts are Robert Baylog and me, Topher Burns. To learn more about our agency, Territorial, go to our website. It's weareterritorial.com. Join our mailing list. We send out really fun stuff in email on a semi-regular basis, and we think you'll find it a treat. And follow us on LinkedIn if you want the updates there.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.
And now I want this to fade out with a little... Sorry, Robert, I can't hear you right now. And was it used in terms of like, is he destroying evidence of a crime? Like, what is he?
No,
he's
okay,
not
but
just
it's
like
so funny
whipping
you
up
bring
hummus.
It's so funny you bring that up because the number of times in which like a food processor was accessory to hiding a murder is like
What?
grotesquely, yeah,
Is it pieces of a person?
basically. I mean,
No.
it's testament to the fact that people thought that this machine was a real workhorse, that they were like, I could grind up this person I just murdered. Yeah.
I mean, the femur. That's not going to do anything to a femur or a tooth.
You're not gonna get bone in there, but like this.
No.
Yeah. Isn't that?
Oh my.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Wow. You know what? I gotta say, like, if your endeavor is to dispose of human remains, the last thing you want to do is make ineffectual mess.
Yeah.
And like, that's got to be the one. Like, oh man, I just blended up,
Right.
minuscule parts of this person and managed on doing nothing to like hide my actual crime.
Yeah.
All I've done is create
So
more
spread
evidence.
it everywhere.
Yeah.
But I also
yeah.
like if you were trying to dispose of a like, let's say 150-pound person, I wouldn't do it 4 quarts at a time. Do you know what I mean? Like that is just it's really
Yeah, totally. The emotional toll alone just has to be horrific.
yeah, it's rough. It's really
Oh
rough.
man. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think it's what has this person never heard of like vats of lye?
Right.
Come on.